Okay, it's been a hot minute since I've had a proper sit-down video, and I feel the need to talk about this game called Bright Memory. But before the video starts, I'd like to make an announcement. Some of you may have noticed that I changed my YouTube icon as of recently. Some of you may have not. Some of you could even give less of a fuck. Personally, I just wanted something authentic to the channel, and I felt that what I had before was more of a placeholder and less of a permanent staple to the brand of Sir Capcom. It wasn't something I could really call my own. So that's why I want to take the time to give a special thanks to my good friend Kai Nanashi, otherwise known as Mochi amongst me and my circle of friends, for making this beautiful work of art for me, which I will display on screen. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that is some good shit, and I really love that. Having this new YouTube icon not only makes me very giddy, it gives me everlasting shit posting power. Now for reference, this is where the idea originated from. This was something I did on a whim. I never really meant anything by it, apart from my own amusement and for getting a few laughs from my friends. But after some time of letting it sit on my page and looking at it every now and again, I brought the idea to Kai about making an icon around this concept. We talked about it for a bit, and eventually she was on board. She then spent a lot of time, months even, working on this just for me. I gave her full freedom to do with it as she wished, so long as she had this concept in mind. And you know what? I'm very happy with the final product. It couldn't have been any better, in my personal opinion. If you're like me and you're interested in her artwork, please support her by following her Instagram. She makes some amazing stuff, and I personally would like to see her page grow even more as a result. I'll leave a link to her Instagram page down in the description below, so be sure to support her by following. And the next time she posts anything, be sure to comment the phrase, "good shit mate." I'll let you take a moment to pause the video to do it. We good now? Alright then. Now that this announcement's out of the way, on with the video. Alright, for those of you who don't know, Bright Memory is an FPS shooter. That is pretty clear to see from the trailer alone. However, one of the many things that is very unique about this game is the fact that it incorporates hack and slash combat as well. Similar to that of Bayonetta and Devil May Cry, there is a combo system that basically rates your combo skills and goes as far as to SSS+, at least to my knowledge. This game has been in development for a few years now, maybe even longer. And one of the most notable things that I found out about this game is that the studio in question that's been making this game has only been worked on by one person. So any of the criticisms I may have of this game, just keep in mind the little fact that this game has only been worked on by one person. As a result of it, I will not be too critical of this game. Any criticisms I may have will not be as tough as, say, if it were a whole development team. If there was a whole group of people working on this game, I would be more critical of this game. But because it's only one singular person working on this game, I'm going to be a little bit more lenient as a result of these circumstances. However, I will still maintain a level of honesty and give you my personal, authentic opinion of this game and whether or not you should or should not get this game. Now with that being said, let me break down the pros and the cons of this game. Starting us off, we're going to go with the pros of Bright Memory. Visuals are great. From a scale of 1 to 10, I personally think it's around an 8, maybe even an 8.5. Nothing too grand, nothing too spectacular, but it definitely has its appeal. The environment itself looks very amazing. Just the overall aesthetic of the environments you're working with the detail that's gone into this game, it looks very decent. And honestly, the detail on the characters, as well as the enemy models and your guns, all the other things that contribute to the visual aesthetics of this game are very detailed. And I would say that overall, it's a very nice looking game. Point number 2 is the fact that this game has probably one of the most solid gameplay mechanics I've ever seen in a while. It's actually very good. You obviously have guns, which you rely on heavily in this game. However, I mentioned to you guys prior that your primary, your secondary, or your sidearm are not the only weapons you have at your disposal. You have other abilities that are shown up on your HUD. You have access to starting abilities like your beam sword, which is very essential to cutting down enemies with multiple beam strikes, and they have 2 different abilities that are attached to that sword that you can use to dish out more damage. If you hold space, you also have a much greater jump, which will propel you upwards to reach greater heights, and is very much useful to reach certain areas that require you to jump that high. because not every area you can just get a single jump. You have to hold down space so that way you can reach and vault up to that area that you can't really necessarily get up to without doing that jump. In this game, one of the important mechanics you have to work with is the dodge mechanic. And that mechanic is so useful. If you have any directional input that lets you evade from side to side or backwards, then you're pretty much going to be fine. You can also use this in the air. So say if you were to get into a tight situation where you're in the air and you need to avoid as quickly as possible, you can still use that evade tool in the air. So make use of this tool, be sure to practice with it and play with the mechanic a little bit to get a feel for how it works and how it feels. You have access to an EMP charge as well, which can float basic enemies and allow you to combo them freely for a set amount of time. Certain enemies will not be in the air as much. Other enemies will stay for a long period of time. So be sure to play with that and see which enemies you need to prioritize when you hit them with the EMP. The last of your starting abilities is a grapple hook, which it's already self-explanatory. You can use this grapple hook to traverse certain parts of the environment that require the hook. But the other use that it also has is that you can use this hook to pull yourself closer to your enemies. So if you want to be more in the face of another enemy, you can use that hook, get away from the enemies that are already huddled around you, and prioritize the one enemy or two that you want to get rid of as soon as possible. It's not always recommended to use the hook for this very reason, but it has its uses for the most part. You can always play with it, see what works for you. Thankfully, there is a skill tree that you can use to upgrade and to add on to the list of abilities you already have. It upgrades a certain amount of your abilities that you can use for later portions of the game or in different playthroughs. You can unlock these abilities as a result of killing enemies and picking up their XP drops. The skill tree is divided into 3 sections: power, skill, and latency. So you can choose between which section you want to prioritize first versus another. Point number 4, enemies are varied in this game. There is no one type of enemy, nor two. There are multiple types of enemies. On top of the landscape, the different styles of movement, the combat, and abilities you have at your disposal, this game doesn't have enemies that are too repetitive. You have your basic enemies, which are practically undead ghoul-like beings, practically zombies to an extent, which are not the hardest to deal with. They're practically the easiest enemies to confront. You have behemoth-like enemies, which are not too quick, but they definitely can dish out a lot of damage if they get near. You have bats with projectile-based abilities, so staying in one area isn't necessarily the best course of action. You also have mini-bosses that you can be dealing with. I like to call them mini-bosses because they tend to be the harder enemies to deal with. You also have a group of enemy soldiers that you have to deal with in this game. So on top of fighting enemies that have blunt weapons or melee attacks, you also have enemies that are going to shoot you on sight, so be aware of that. There are also wolves in this game and other creatures in the game itself. Wolves are practically the easiest to kill. They don't take that much, but in terms of actual frequency of these things, they don't come often, but they are the easiest enemies to kill. And then you have your actual bosses. There's about like 2. Variety isn't a problem. Enemies are also sturdy, so it's not possible to just one-shot them easily. On top of that, they all do a substantial amount of damage, thus adding a level of difficulty and challenge to the game, as you can't just brush your way through scot-free. You're probably gonna get hit. Considering the large number of enemies you have to deal with at a time, you're probably going to get hit at some point, especially in your first playthrough. And I really like that about the game. There is challenge to this game. It's not just super easy. When I first started playing it, I practically died a few times. You have to think about the way you play rather than just mindlessly run into combat and expect immediate results. Sometimes in hack and slash games you can kind of run in, just do whatever and not have as many consequences, but there is some level of thinking. In this game you have to put a lot of thinking into your combat and choose whether to engage or disengage from combat. And given that it has Souls-like influences, you definitely want to tread with caution. And lastly, the final pro of this game. You ever just get tired of the same bland outfit or the same base outfit for certain characters and you just want to change how they look? Well, this game has that for you. Often we find ourselves wanting to make our character look a certain way out of preference and just for aesthetic reasons, and often we don't get that from games. We don't get that permission to do as we please unless we want to mod the game. However, this game does have that permission to do so. So if you don't like using the base outfit, then you can choose from up to 4 outfits. The base outfit and the 3 additional outfits that you get from the game. If you pick any other outfit apart from the base outfit, you're just fulfilling your lewd and perverted little fantasies. Don't lie to yourselves. I'm onto you, you horny little shit. Once upon a time, psych you fucking thought. This game has very little context in the story when you first boot up the game. I've played this game multiple times, around roughly 3 or 4, and all I could really pick up is some of the basic narrative from its lackluster cutscenes. There's a group of people we need to stop, and I have an ally that I need to meet up with who isn't here yet. I hope that he is safe. Cut through enemies, yada yada yada. There's hardly any clarification, and that's not very good for appealing to new players that are playing blind. There needs to be clear narrative in a game such as this, which it does not have. However, you can attain this context through the store page of Steam by scrolling down the page of Bright Memory. It tells you right there if you scroll down. Personally, I would have preferred if this was just implemented in the game to begin with. I would have rather that this information would have been given to me when I booted the game up, rather than having to deal with piecing together a puzzle that isn't even consistent. It just doesn't work. Another flaw that this game has is that there's a lack of customizable keybinds. If you're like me and you don't like the default settings, you just want to change them, right? Some games just don't feel good using the default controls, so you have to change them up to your level of comfort. So until the full release comes out, you're stuck with the default controls that Bright Memory is programmed with. Sorry bud, but that's just how the game goes. Moving on to one of the more conflicting cons of this game, and that's the difficulty. This one's a little odd for me because this one can be a little bit subjective. Some people think this is true, some people may think this is false. Despite me praising the enemy variety, it feels like some enemies are more of a pushover than others, which is very surprising given that this game has the title Souls-like in the description. But for some reason, some enemies just don't feel anywhere near the level of difficult that a Souls game would have. Not to say this game is anywhere near as hard as a Souls game, it definitely has its challenges, but it's not backbreaking. Like for instance, the first boss you play in this game, you can practically avoid him and get pop shots on him for free. You can avoid him the entire time, and you have such an open space, it's pretty much easy to avoid him. The second boss, you're a little bit more contained, but you can practically avoid him so much, it's not that hard to move away from him. Unless it's the second state, then maybe it's a little bit more challenging, but even then, just jump around and just use your dodge mechanic. Maybe it was just me, but I feel like after learning some patterns, it's not even that hard. If anything, the mini bosses were harder to deal with than the actual bosses themselves. Oh my god. Transitions. Oh my god. One major thing that you want in a video game is for it to transition well from scene to scene, from one part to the next. In the beginning of the game, it did pretty decent. I think it did well to transition into a cutscene, into combat, and into a little bit more of context of the story. But once you get past that point in the game, there is very little reason to justify why we have more than half of these transitions. Let me give you an example. Enemy shows up, mini cutscene. Fade to white. Another enemy type shows up. Dodge. Character reacts. Fade to white. More enemies show up. Cutscene. Fade to white. More enemies show up. Character reacts. Fade to white. What I just described there was literally within 3 minutes of actual game time. If you don't believe me, let me just show you. That was in the early stages of this game. Imagine what this was like for me throughout the entire game. The skill tree feels so incomplete. If you just play the game for a while, you can attain all these abilities within the first 2 playthroughs of this game. However, because it's still in development, I'm gonna let it off a little bit. I'm not expecting everything to be on that tree already. I'm pretty sure this will most likely get tuned up for the final product. This was just more of like a slice of life thing for me. Maybe I was just being a little bit too critical, but I just felt like the skill tree could have had a little bit more, you know? Soundtrack's kind of bland. I just kind of don't like it. I mean, maybe it has its charms, but it just feels kind of repetitive, and it feels almost as annoying to listen to half the time. Like, they were just kind of They were basic at best. And moving on to the final flaw of this game, there is a lack of weapon variety and upgrades. I mentioned this already, but you have 2 primaries. You have an assault rifle, you have a shotgun, and you have a pistol, as well as an EMP and a beam sword. The hook doesn't really count. That wasn't really a weapon. That was more like a utility. However, almost all your abilities can be upgraded, but for some reason, some of the upgrades are not for the main weapons themselves. It feels like they were not prioritized whatsoever. What if I wanted to upgrade the damage of some of my weapons? What about if I wanted to upgrade ammo capacity? What if I wanted better health? What if I wanted to have my beam sword to have a longer duration and less cost on my special abilities that are implemented within that sword? Maybe I wanted my cooldown to be reduced on certain other abilities. Hell, having different guns with varying strengths and weaknesses would make me feel more in control of how I want to play and would force me to prioritize my needs versus my wants while I played. It would also allow me to choose between harder hitting weapons with less ammo or have a less damaging gun but would build consistent damage and have a larger ammo capacity. I personally would like that change, and I hope that it does get implemented into the game, but then again, I'm not the developer. This is only a dream to have in the game. This is only like my personal interest, my own personal insight of what would probably make this game more entertaining, but at the very end of the day, I can only dream. So what's my final verdict? Is it worth the buy? Is it worth testing out for yourselves? I personally think it is, actually. Unfortunately, since the early access ended in the 25th of May, you will have to buy the game full price when it releases, as opposed to buying the game for less than $8 and getting the full game for free. Wait, stop the video. Take a break for a minute past me. I'll take over from here. Hey guys, it's Future Me coming in to quickly clarify the last statement. The information my past self had told you just now is actually false. After quickly hopping onto the Steam store to do some fact checking on the 13th of April, it pleases me to announce that you still have the opportunity to purchase the alpha build of Bright Memory for roughly $10, thus allowing new owners of this game to attain the free digital copy of Bright Memory Infinite when it eventually releases. I recommend you act fast as the release date has yet to be established. I don't know how long this deal lasts, so if you are interested, don't miss out. Now that I cleared up this mistake, I'll let my past self take the wheel from here. This genuinely does have a lot of promise, and I definitely think it has the tools to succeed. There are some elements that definitely need to be tweaked. The story primarily is one of them. Apart from that, the game was pretty much a 7 out of 10 as it is currently. It wasn't phenomenal by any means, but it definitely sold me with its unique style of game design. I never thought I'd see the day where I would get to play a first-person shooter while also having elements that are similar to that of Devil May Cry. I know that Destiny technically has that, but I don't think it has it to the degree that Bright Memory does. Whether or not you buy the game is solely up to you, but I do recommend you at least give it a go. Well, that was it for my review of Bright Memory. It was probably a shit show and I probably botched it, but I hope you enjoyed the video nonetheless. If you did, please leave a like down below, subscribe if you're new, and be sure to click the bell notification so you don't miss any uploads. With that being said, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you guys in the next video.